This is a really fun project, whether you are a granny square fan or never done granny squares before. This is such a treat. We're going to be making a lot of granny squares, some in half granny squares, and then we're going to join them together for a really cute cardigan. Now, the one I'm going to be showing on camera is in these colors and these tones, but there's other ones that you can make as well. I'm choosing to do mine a little bit of an ombre look going on here, and this is my main color. So let's talk about that. I am using the Upcycle Alpaca Blend worsted weight from We Crochet. This parchment color will be my main color, and then I'm going to also be adding in some pistachio, some sage, and some thyme to make it blend quite nicely for almost like an ombre look effect for this beautiful cardigan. The other thing you will need is a size 4mm crochet hook, a scissors to cut the ends, and you're going to get really friendly with a yarn needle, because whenever we're making granny squares, especially if we're using more than one color, there's a lot of ends to weave in. Pick your favorite show and just accept that part of the process. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you on camera how to make a full square and a half granny square in this cute pattern we will be using today. So for this on camera today, I'm going to be using my two most contrasting colors. But just note that you can change this color out as much as you want. I'll have my main color, and then for each square, you can even do a rainbow one or whatever you want, a solid one. It doesn't matter. You could even do one solid color for this, and it would be really cute. But I'm going to show you in these two contrasting colors, but every single granny square will follow these same steps. We're going to be starting our round one with our main color. We will be turning at the end of each round. So let's go ahead and get started with that. We're going to start by creating a magic circle. If you've never done that, you can go ahead and watch a slower video on my blog to see how to do that. And then we will start by working inside this magic circle. So I'm going to start with what is called a stacked single crochet. This is a great way to start a round versus doing just chains. It's a little bit more, it's not noticeable, and it looks more like a stitch versus chaining your very first stitch. So to start a stacked single crochet, we're going to insert our hook into the magic circle, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through two. Now we basically just did a single crochet, but we're not done yet. This bar over here, the one to the far left, we're going to insert our hook through that, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through two. That is our first stitch. It's called a stacked single crochet. We can go ahead if we want to grab a marker and mark it, especially if you've never worked these before, because on the side they look like stitches. It makes a nice look, but you don't want to go to the bottom one. You want to make sure that when we end this round, we are ending on the first stitch of the round. So go ahead and mark it if you've never worked those before. Now we're going to double crochet 2 stitches into the magic ring or circle. So 2 double crochet stitches, and then we're going to chain 3. Then we are going to do 3 double crochet stitches. And chain 3. And we're going to repeat this 2 more times with doing 3 double crochet stitches. Ooh. And then 1 more time. So we'll double crochet 3. And then chain 3. Now that is our first round. We can go ahead and take this tail end and we can pull this circle closed. But if you want, just for some design effect, you don't have to pull it all the way closed. I kind of like leaving a circle opening in the center. It just kind of helps add to that granny square look. Now we are going to place this yarn aside. So I'm going to leave this strand to the back of my work. I'm going to insert my hook into the very first stitch of this round. I can take out that stitch marker. And then I'm going to grab my second color. Now what we will do here, and notice I haven't cut this first color. We're not going to cut it yet. What we'll do here is we'll leave a tail end to weave in later, and I'm going to pull this through that first stitch and through the loop on my hook. And now I'm going to turn my work, and now we're going to be working on the wrong side of our work. I'm going to start with a chain 4. Next, we'll be working in between these stitches of these double crochets. So we have 3 double crochet stitches here, and we're going to work in the space between them. So we're going to insert our hook between the first 2 double crochet stitches and do a single crochet, and then chain 3. And then we'll insert our hook between the next double crochet stitches and single crochet. And then this is one of our corners, and on the corners we will be chaining 4. And then we're going to repeat that. We're going to do a single crochet in between the next 2 double crochet stitches and chain 3. And then we're going to single crochet in between the next double crochet stitches. And then we're at a corner, so we're going to chain 4. And I know it doesn't look like a corner here. This is really looking more like a flower at this point, but the next round will really help it look more like a granny square. We're going to keep repeating that around where we insert our hook between the next double crochet stitches and do a single crochet, chain 3. And then we'll insert our hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches and single crochet. And then we will chain 4. Insert our hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches and chain 3. And insert our hook between the last 2 double crochet stitches. And this is where we're going to stop. We're almost completing our single crochet, but before we complete it, we're going to change colors. So I'm going to bring my yarn that I'm currently using to the front of my work, because this is the wrong side of our work that we see. So I'm going to keep this yarn towards the front of my work, and then I'm going to grab our first color, which is still attached, and I'm going to finish this single crochet stitch with our first color. I'm going to pull through those 2 loops, and now we've changed colors and completed round 2. I know we have quite a few strands kind of sticking out here, but they're still going to sit for the next couple of rounds. So I'm going to leave everything attached. I have not fastened off anything at all, and I'm going to turn my work. Now we have the right side facing, and this is where you have to pay attention a little bit here. It's easier to see this on video versus describing this in the pattern, but we're going to be working a little bit backwards. So we're going to work into this corner space. These chain 3 spaces from round 1 are corner spaces. So I'm simply going to start by doing a stacked single crochet into the last chain space that we had worked on the previous, so I'm simply going to start this next round by working a stacked single crochet into the first chain spaces that we had done on the previous round. So I'm going to insert my hook into this chain 3 space, working a little bit backwards, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, go through that left bar there of the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then pull through 2. So there's our stacked single crochet. We can go ahead and mark that as the first stitch of our round. And now we're going to do 2 more double crochet stitches into this space. I know it's a little bit tight, but I promise in the end it looks great and it looks almost seamless. So now we're going to do 2 more double crochet stitches into that space. And then we are going to chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space that we have here, and we're going to work the next corner. So into the next corner, we are going to be working 3 double crochet stitches, chain 2, and 3 more double crochet stitches. So we'll start by working 1 double crochet, then 2, then 3. And this is where we are going to chain 2. And now we're going to work 3 more double crochet stitches into that space. So 1, 2, and 3. And that's how our corner is going to be worked for this round. We're going to chain 1 and skip the chain 3 space. Working the next corner, we will double crochet 3. Chain 2, double crochet 3. Chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space and work into this space, to that whole space, for 3 double crochets chain 2, and 3 double crochets. When we're working across both the chain spaces, so we're working right back down to our round 1 space that we had made with this color, we are hiding these chain spaces on the corners in our secondary color, and that's what we want to do. This will look really cute when we are finished, but we are hiding certain areas of it so that it gives a unique look. All right, so here's our last section. We're going to chain 1, skip 3, and we're going to double crochet 3 into this first space that we were working into. And then we will chain 2, and that's it for this space because we already worked those first 3 double crochets when we started this round on this corner. So now we're back to the end of the round. We can go ahead and move our stitch marker. You can insert your hook into that stitch. And now we're going to drop our first color, our primary color, and then we're going to grab our secondary color, and we're going to yarn over and pull through. Now notice I'm carrying my yarn up the back because it's not noticeable anyway, and it's less ends to weave in if we can carry our yarn a bit. So now I'm ready for the next round. So this will be round 4. I'm going to turn my work. I'm going to start by chaining 4. And then I'm going to insert my hook in between the next 2 double crochet stitches and create a single crochet, chain 3, insert my hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches and make a single crochet, and then chain 3. We're going to do that again across these double crochet stitches. So insert my hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches and do a single crochet and chain 3. Insert your hook into the next between the next 2 double crochet stitches and do a single crochet. And now we're at the corner where we will chain 4. We're going to keep repeating this all the way around. So I'm going to work between the next 2 double crochet stitches with a single crochet and chain 3. Work between the next 2 double crochet stitches, single crochet and chain 3. Repeat that again. Insert your hook between the next 2 double crochets and chain single crochet, then chain 3. Insert your hook between the next 2 double crochets for a single crochet. And then when you get to these corner spaces, we're going to chain 4. We're going to keep repeating that all the way around for this round. Now as we get to the end, we'll work between the next 2 double crochets with a single crochet and chain 3. And then I'm going to work between the next 2 double crochets. But for this one, we're going to stop. We're going to bring this yarn to the front of our work. Then we're going to pick up our primary color again and yarn over and pull through to complete that stitch. And that's how we're going to finish the round. And at this point, we can take our scissors and we can fasten off our secondary color to get it out of the way. So now we're back to working our last round in our primary color. We will have some ends to weave in later. I'm going to go ahead and turn my work, and this is looking quite nice. You can see how these chains on the previous rounds look like a little popping flower here. I really enjoy that. But now we need to do this round where we will be hiding some of this so it looks quite nice. And for this round, we once again are going to be starting by going backwards and working in this corner space first. So we're going to insert our hook into this space, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, doing a stacked single crochet here. So we'll want to go back into that bar, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. We can go ahead and mark this stitch as the first stitch of this round. And this is our last round here. These work up quite quickly once you get used to the pattern. Now we're going to do 2 more double crochets into this chain space. So 1 and 2. And I want to note that I am pulling up this third loop a little bit more so that it doesn't get too crowded, working backwards that way. Now we're going to chain 1, skip the next chain 3, and then the next chain 3 space, we are going to double crochet 3. Then we will chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space, and on the corner space, the chain 4, we're going to work the same way we did on the previous rounds, where we do 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets all into that corner space. Then we will chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space, and 3 double crochets into the next chain 3 space. And then we're going to chain 1 and work a corner space. So we're skipping the next chain 3, going right into that corner space, where we're going to do 3 double crochets, chain 2, and 3 double crochets. Chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space, and do 3 double crochets into the next chain 3 space. Chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space, and we're going to work a corner space. Chain 1 and skip the next chain 3 space, and do 3 double crochets into the next chain 3 space. Chain 1 and skip the next chain 3 space, and in the last chain 4 space, the one we started in, we will do 3 double crochets, chain 2. So here's where I'm actually going to stop you from joining, and I'm going to show you why. So we have completed our very first granny square. We can see how our secondary color really pops here. You can pull these chain 3s towards the front if you like. I definitely do that as I'm blocking. It looks like a really cute flower to me, is what it resembles. But what I want to do to end this round is not do your traditional slip stitch to join. The reason why is we'll be using these squares to seam them together, and I like to have the exact same count on every edge, and I also like to have it be seamless. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fasten off at the end of this round, and I'm going to pull this through. And then I'm going to grab my needle. So yeah, we haven't joined, we fastened off, we pulled through, but I'm going to show you how to do a seamless join here that looks absolutely fabulous, keeps our stitch count the same, and then you really can't tell where we started the beginning of each round. I'm going to move my stitch marker. So my stitch marker is at the first stitch of the round. We're actually not going to be working into that stitch. We're going to skip it, and we're going to go to the second double crochet stitch of our round. I'm going to move my stitch marker out of the way here. So into the second double crochet stitch, I have entered my needle as if I'm going to work this stitch like I would with my hook. But I'm going to pull it all the way through. And then see where we have our last chain. I'm now going to insert my needle right down the center of that last chain. So I'm just going down the center of that chain. And now I'm going to pull this. Notice we are actually making a mock stitch here. So we're making a mock stitch that goes right above our first stitch. And I'm going to pull that to be the tightness that I like. So now we can see that this looks seamless. We created a mock stitch on top of our first stitch of the round, which also helps it be the right height to end on, because our first stitch sometimes tightens down. And when we're looking around the edges, we really cannot tell where we started and stopped this round because this is a seamless join. Now I'm going to turn my work over, and I'm simply going to weave in this end on the back. But be careful when you first pull this down. You do not want to pull too tight because you don't want to mess with the length of the stitch up here. If you pull too tight, it'll tighten that mock stitch down a bit too much. So I'm going to pull this, still looks great. And now I'll finish weaving in this end and all the other ends on the back of this granny square. So your next step will be to weave in ends, or you can make all your granny squares and weave in your ends in all one shot, but it's completely up to you how you want to do this and what order you want to do it in terms of weaving in your ends. I do tend to weave in my ends a lot when it comes to garments because I know it's going to get a lot of use. So I can fasten off this one, and I have 3 more to weave in, and then I will absolutely not skip the next step, which is blocking. So I'm going to show you how to make the half granny square, and then we're going to talk about the blocking. So I'm going to set this one aside, and we're going to come back and we're going to make this again, but we're going to do it as a half granny square. Now for some of the sizes, we will be doing a round 6 of the granny square. This is not for all sizes, but about half the sizes, we will be doing a round 6. And what that does is it adds just a little bit more onto our granny square so that we can correctly size the entire cardigan to fit well. So for round 6, we're going to start by ending round 5 with a slip stitch. Now we are not going to turn. We are going to keep the right side facing us for this. I'm going to work back into that chain space from the previous round and do a single crochet. And then I'm going to single crochet 2 more into that chain space, and we can go ahead and mark our very first stitch at the beginning of this round. Then we will chain 1, skip the next 3 stitches, and single crochet 3 into the next chain 1 space. And then we're going to do that one more time. We're going to chain 1 and single crochet 3 into the next chain 1 space. And then we will chain 1, and in this space, the corner space, we will do 3 single crochet stitches, a chain 2, and 3 single crochet stitches all into that corner space. Then we're going to repeat this around. So chain 1, skip the next 3 stitches, and single crochet 3 into the next chain space. Chain 1 and do that again. And then we will chain 1 and work into that corner space by doing 3 single crochet stitches, chain 2, and single crochet 3. Work that all the way around until you get to this last chain space, which is also our first, and I'll go over that part. Now I've chained 1, and we're going to work our last 3 single crochet stitches into the same space that we started this round in, and then chain 2. And this is where we can go ahead and fasten off. And then we will join this the exact same way I showed previously when I stopped after round 5. We'll cut our yarn and do an invisible join for this granny square. Now when it comes to this a half granny square, when we are talking about doing that 6th row for this one, I want to give you 2 options to work it. One, if you're like, Brianna, I do not want any extra ends to weave in. What you can do is you can slip stitch very loosely. I would say, placing in between a lot of these strands here, 3 slip stitches almost per row along this edge. You do not want it to be tight, but you can loosely slip stitch down this edge to even it out, and then work this round, because we're going to be working this around and not turning all the way back to the beginning. I'm going to be the person that goes ahead and I'm going to deal with the ends and cut my yarn. So you have 2 options to do it. If you wanted to slip stitch down the side and then start over here, you can do so with the single crochets. I'm going to go ahead and attach my yarn to this stitch on this side. So this would be our stacked single crochet from the previous row with the right side facing. So I'm not turning, and I'm going to attach my yarn. Now the reason why I'm doing it this way is because when we made our full size granny square, we didn't turn, and we kept this single crochet stitches with the right side facing. I think it just looks better. I honestly think it's worth a little bit extra work to have it line up the best. But if it doesn't bother you, you don't notice it, No worries, you don't have to do it this way. You can always turn, or if you want to slip stitch down the side, you can, or if you want to follow what I'm going to do here is I fastened off and I've chained one, and now I'm going to work the row 6 for this size. Now, not every granny square will have the row 6. Some stop at row 5, but this is the row 6 for some of those sizes. So I'm going to start by doing a single crochet into that very first stitch. And then I'm going to chain 1 and do 3 single crochets in the next chain 1 space. And then I'm going to chain 1, skip the next 3 stitches and 3 single crochets into that chain 1 space. And I'm going to do that again. And then I'm going to chain 1 and do 3 single crochets, chain 2, and 3 single crochets all into this corner space. And then we will chain 1 and single crochet 3 into the next chain space, and chain 1 and skip stitches and single crochet 3 into the next chain space, and then chain 1 and in the next chain space single crochet 3, chain 1 and single crochet into that very last stitch. And then we can fasten off and weave in our ends and block this. And because we did that single crochet edge, it's a little bit larger in size than stopping at round 5, and this will help us appropriately size certain measurements for this cardigan. Now, because of the way that we are making this either cardigan or sweater, you can make it into a sweater, and the way that we're doing the neckline and the sleeve line, because we're placing it in diamonds, we definitely need some half squares. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I will tell you straight up, the half squares are actually more work than the full squares because we have more ends to weave in. I did figure out a little bit of a trick though. I'm going to show you to eliminate 2 ends. So we are going to start by doing our magic circle or magic ring again. And then we're going to be working our first stitches into this. So I'm going to start by doing a stacked single crochet, just like we did on the full granny square. And you can mark the stitch if you need to. And then we're going to chain 1. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the very first stitch of this row so that you can tell. So this one will be working in rows instead of rounds, but we're still turning at the end of each row. So I've done a stacked single crochet, I've chained 1, and now I'm going to do 3 double crochets. And then chain 3 and 3 double crochets. And now I'm going to chain 1 and do a double crochet. And that's our last stitch of this round. So I'm stopping before I finish the stitch for a seamless color change here. I can go ahead and pull this a little bit tight if I want to, but now it's time for us to pull in our second color. But I want to show you a trick here. You don't have to use this. You can definitely fasten off at the end of this row. You will have more ends to weave in. But I'm actually going to take my second color. I'm going to take a tape measure. I'm going to pull my tape measure all the way out. And if you want to have less ends to weave in, this will make sense as we go here. I'm simply going to take my color and I'm going to measure out really quick. I just pull it along my tape measure here until I get to about 58 inches, and then I'm going to pinch that. So one end of this has 58 inches. That's going to be for our round 4. But for right now, I'm going to pull through where I pinched, and I'm ready to start my next color. What I will do is all this yarn, this 58 inches, I'm going to leave it aside. I'm going to not worry about that right now. I'll pick it back up later. I'm going to work from the yarn that leads to my ball for this round. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn my work. We're going to start with a chain 3. Then I'm going to insert my hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches for a single crochet and chain 3. Insert my hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches for a single crochet, and then we're going to chain 4 on this corner. Insert my hook between the next 2 double crochets and single crochet, and then chain 3. Insert my hook between the next 2 double crochets and single crochet, and then I'm going to chain 3, and I'm going to single crochet into the very last stitch of this round. I'm going to insert my hook to where the first stitch, row, for the first stitch in this row. I'm going to remove my hook, and then here's where I can go ahead and I can drop my yarn and grab the first color that we started with. So I'm going to tighten down the circle all the way, and then I'm going to grab my main color. Whoop! Maybe that just flung out of the camera. Now I'm going to grab my main color, which is still attached. Now that I've created some yarn tangles here, that was fun. There we go. And I am going to bring this color across. So I am going to be carrying through here. So I'm going to insert my hook into this stitch. So it was the first stitch of round 1. This will be our last stitch in the round. I'm going to grab my main color, and I'm going to pull through all the loops on the hook, but I'm going to leave my tension here a little bit loose. We don't want to pull this too tight because we want this edge to be nice and flat. We don't want it to do any puckering. So I'm going to pull this through all the loops on my hook, and now I'm ready and set up for the next round. This is where I will turn my work, and we can go ahead and fasten off this color. If you're working it either way, you'll fasten off because we can't carry it for our next round. So we can move that out of the way. I still have my 58 inches attached here. I'm just going to let that sit. But as far as the secondary color to the yarn ball, I have fastened that off. Now I'm going to be working this round in my main color. And we are going to start this round by working into that chain 1 space. So we have our stacked single crochet in the chain 1 space. We're going to take our hook directly into that chain 1 space and create a stacked single crochet. Now we're going to chain 1, and working in that same chain 1 space from the very first row, we are going to double crochet 3. Then we will chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space, and we're going to work the corner. So our corner right here is the same as before. We do 3 double crochet stitches. Then we will chain 2 and do 3 double crochet stitches all into that corner space. Then we will chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space, and in the last chain 1 space at the end of our row here, we will do 3 double crochet stitches. So 1, 2, and 3. And then we are going to chain 1 and double crochet into that space one more time. And that's the end of our round. So before I finish this double crochet stitch, I want my last yarn over and pull through 2. I'm going to go ahead and grab that 58 inches of yarn, and I'm going to yarn over and pull through with that. So this is carrying it up one row instead of, because if we were to carry this all the way across here, it's just too long of a carry. It causes some puckering when you're blocking and stuff. It doesn't work great. So that's why I did this secondary color row the way I did, leaving a long strand, because now we can use this strand for the next row. So I'm going to leave my main color attached. I'm going to turn my work, and we're going to start with a chain 3. We're going to insert our hook in between the next 2 double crochet stitches and single crochet, and then chain 3, insert our hook between the next double crochet stitches and single crochet, and chain 3. We're going to do that again. We're going to insert our hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches and single crochet and chain 3, insert our hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches, single crochet, and now we're at a corner. So we will chain 4. We're going to do that over here. We're going to insert our hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches and single crochet and chain 3. Insert our hook between the next 2 double crochets and single crochet and chain 3. And then we're back to the end of this row where we're going to work this one more time. We're going to insert our hook between the next 2 double crochet stitches and single crochet and chain 3. Between the next 2 double crochet stitches and single crochet and chain 3. And then we are going to go to the very last stitch of this row. So we have our chain 1. I didn't mark this stitch. We have our chain 1, and then we have our stacked single crochet. We're going to insert our hook between, or right into the top of that stacked single crochet. And now we are ready to work our main color again. So I'm actually going to be fastening off our main color because this is such a long carry across the front. If you are brave and you want to carry this across the front at the right tension for blocking, feel free. I find it actually looks better to take the time to weave in the ends. So I'm going to fasten off my main color, and then I'm going to reattach it to this row. I'm going to pull it through all my loops on the hook, and then I'm ready to turn my work. So notice we will have a couple more ends for these half granny squares, but I've tried to reduce that by that little trick of carrying our secondary color up for this row, so that it's just a couple ends that we don't have to weave in. I'm doing the best I can to make it less work, but still look really, really nice. So we are going to start our final row by working into this chain 1 space with a stacked single crochet. So I'm going to insert my hook into the chain 1 space and make a stacked single crochet. And then I'm going to chain 1 and work 3 double crochets into that chain 1 space. Now we will chain 1, skip the chain 3, and in the next chain 3 we are going to be working into this space over both of those chains from the last 2 rows and working 3 double crochets. Chain 1, skip the next chain 3 space, and now we're going to work into the corner here. We're working around both of those chain spaces. For chain 2, 3 double crochets. Chain 1, we're going to skip the next chain 3 space, and in the next chain 3 space we will do 3 double crochets. Chain 1, skip the next 3 chains space, and in the last chain 1 space we will do 3 double crochets, chain 1, and double crochet into that chain 1 space one more time. And this is where we can go ahead and we can fasten off, and we have created our corner half granny square that works great for spaces. And then we'll go ahead and weave in our ends and block this as well. Now let's talk blocking. If you are a granny square fan, and you know this won't be your last granny square project, buying one of these boards, these peg boards, is such a great investment. I have a link for this. It comes with these metal pins that you can rearrange it to be any place on your board. You can do hexagon granny squares, you can do regular squares, you can block quite a few things. You can use this for many purposes, but mainly for granny squares. They are a lifesaver. And the reason is you don't have to use your traditional blocking board with pins and pin down each side of this. It stretches it and makes it quite nice. Now, for this size of granny square, and we have 2 granny square options for this pattern. This, I have measured my pins and they are 3.5 inches apart on each side. That's another benefit to this, is it's already set up to the size that you need, and it makes it much, much faster. So I'm going to remove some of these squares that I've done, and you can see the notable difference between blocking and not blocking. Isn't that just like quite incredible? It gets it to the right size. It makes it really nice and finished and polished. And that way, when we go to join these squares together, they are all exactly the same size and it's easy to join them together. And it's almost like ironing your clothes. So for this, what I like to do, my favorite method, just because I do find a bit more of aggressive block works for these, you can put them on here and steam it. However, I like taking this sprayer, which is an automatic sprayer. You don't have to sit here and pump it a ton. It's great for garments and blankets. And I just like to spray it down. So I have made this quite damp, and I like to, this is one extra step. You don't have to do it, but I kind of like to pull each one of these secondary color chain threes forward a bit, just to make it look a little bit nice. That way they come more to the front than the back. And then I'm going to go ahead and place this onto my blocking board where each corner goes onto a peg. And then I kind of straighten out the edges, make it look nice and clean, and then slide it down. And I can block multiple ones at once. We can stack these several deep and they all dry at the same time, and it really makes blocking much faster. I tend to do this in segments where I will like create quite a few, block them all, and then move them aside. It's almost like an assembly line going on here, because your next step is to make a lot of these, a lot of half and full granny squares. And notice for the half, these are all half granny squares happening here. For these, I'll put in a couple extra pegs in the middle. I have a half one going this way. Underneath, I have a half one going this way. And I like to just catch this side as well to make it nice and straight for these corner pieces. You can see the dramatic difference here that blocking can make. It's just incredible. It's a step that you do not want to skip. So our next steps are to spend a lot of time making granny squares, getting very familiar with them, making a ton of them, weaving in a ton of ends. But these beautiful pieces of artwork are worth it. And once we have the amount of granny squares you need for the size that you're making, we are going to assemble those next. So following the instructions, you can make as many of each color or solid colors, or however you want to design your color tones for this. And then we'll come on back and we'll show you how to arrange them and join them together. Now I like to lay my squares out the way that I'll be seaming them, because I can just kind of work in a zigzag across each row. So I'm putting these ones together for the sleeve, and I'll just simply go ahead and start by attaching my yarn on one side. Now I like to join corners to corners every single time. So I'll want to start by doing the corners together here. I'm going to leave a little tail to weave in on this side later, but I'm simply going to be starting at the corners. All right, so we're going to come in close here to join these together, and I'm going to start by bringing my needle down through the back loop of one of the chain one stitches from the corner of this granny square, and I'm going to leave a tail end. I'll leave that in later, and then I'm going to go down through the back loop of the chain space over here, and I'm going to go down the back loop only, and then come up the back loop on the next stitch. And then I can go ahead and pull that strand through. Now we're going to come back to this side, and I do like to, when I alternate from side to side, I like to go down through the back loop here, up there, and then sometimes I'll keep on going with my needle back and forth a bit, but that's hard to see on camera. So I'm just going to show you small step by small step. And then as you get comfortable with it, you'll really be able to go fast with that needle. So I'm going to go back to this top side, go down through the back loop, up through the back loop, pull that through, and you'll see these lines here. I know that they're there. I'm leaving them there for a second. I'm leaving it a bit loose because I want to show you what happens here in a minute. So I'm going to go down through the back loop, and I'm going back into the previous stitch that I had come up from before, and then come up the next back loop. And we're doing that to each side, just alternating sides, going down through the back loop only and up through the back loop only, and then just pulling your yarn. You can pull it tight each time, but I find it's easier to be able to see your back loops if you don't. I'm going to do one more here, down through the back loop, up through the back loop. And now what happens is when we have this strand that goes back and forth here, I'm going to try to hold this tight because my tail end isn't secured yet. But when I pull on this, it will pull all that area to a nice seam. It pulls it to a seamless join, and then you just keep on going across. It's a good idea to pull it tight every so often. And once you have your tail end there, you're totally fine. It's not going to go anywhere now. We've got some tension on it. You don't want to pull too tight because you don't want any puckering, but you're just going to simply be working down and up those back loops between stitches and then across the space here. So when you get comfortable with it, you'll be able to just maybe do a few with your needle at the same time and then pull through, and it goes a little bit faster that way. So I do one side and then I zip over here and I do the other side and pull all of that through. And then once I get to a certain point where I've got quite a few, you can see that we've got this gap here that we can go ahead and pull that closed. And look how nice that is. I'm going to keep working across here, and then when I get to this other side, I'll simply work around this corner and back down. All right, so as I get to this corner, I am going to go back onto this side, down and up, and I'm up into that chain space, and then same with this side, down the back loop and up to that chain space. So it matches up quite nicely, and I can go ahead and I can pull these together. And if these sides aren't perfectly even, it's because their chain spaces there might be slightly different. Totally fine. But now we're going to be going and working down this side. So I'm going to work down here and I'll turn and work back up here. But then we'll simply grab at that corner. So I'm going to go down that chain space and back up. And then coming back to this side, go down the chain space and back up on this side. And once you do your final corner, when you have all four corners touching, you can always loop through some of these center corner stitches to pull them together tightly on your last square when you bring it in there. For now, we're simply going to be working back and forth between these granny squares, creating a nice seamless join. And this right here is the most gratifying thing. I love it so much. Look how that just joins together very nicely. Now keep joining all of your squares. If you need to, you can go ahead and look at that chart to make sure that you are joining them in the right ways. Also, be careful that you're not going to flip any of these on the wrong side. You want to make sure that you are having the right side facing, and you're going to keep on working on that until you have your pieces ready to seam them all together. Now, when it comes to the position that we're going to seam all of these squares, I've laid them out for you so that you can seam this whole thing flat, placing them in place, and then we're simply going to fold and seam underneath the arms and down the sides. So I kind of want to show you what that diagram looks like so you know what to expect. So for one of the sizes, and they will be different depending on what size you're making, you'll see that I've organized them by color, and you can always make this a solid color or two colors. I'm just showing you the three tones that I used on this chart. And then I also have these extra half squares here as well, and I'll show you where those go in. You'll notice that there's a blue area that's going to come in helpful when we work underneath the arm with these half triangles, half squares, triangles. And then we have these red lines here. And what this means is you are not going to be seaming together right here. You're going to lay them out and you're going to seam everywhere, every seam, but these red lines. So you can see that right here, that these squares are not seamed together. The reason why is we need to fold this and split at this for the sleeves, the front, and the back. So I can't get the whole thing on camera, but this would be one of my sleeves. This is the back, and down here is that V-neck front with the rest of the front down here as well. So what we can do, I'm going to show you for the other side, because this side, while it's still laying flat, you're going to lay it all out flat and seam it together. Or if you are doing join as you go, this chart will be really handy for you to place them as you're making them and join them as you go. But this other side, I have already seamed together so that you can see this in action. So this is a sleeve seamed together along with the side body. We no longer have these jagged edges. It's all seamed together and it looks quite nice. Now I'm going to flip this to the front so we can see the front. We've got this V-neck happening here, which is really, really nice. And then our arm coming out to the side. Now what we need this triangle for is underneath the arm. When we are attaching all of these pieces on the side, so you'll see here, I find it best to start at the bottom of the side and seam up, and you can see how these fit together. And then also on the sleeve, we'll want to start from the edge of the sleeve, so this darkest color over here, starting at the edge, creating this area where we will do the cuff later, and seam inwards. And when we do that, when we seam all of these together, we end up having a space where we need to put a triangle. So if I were to seam all these together all the way in, what happens is we have this right here. See that triangle space? That's where this is going to come in handy. We're simply going to seam a triangle in there, and then it looks really, really nice. So we can see on this side, it's barely noticeable because your triangle kind of blends in, but this is where my triangle is underneath the other arm. And then it gives it more space under the arm, as well as makes this work quite nicely, and it lays nicely. So the steps for doing this, you can seam these together however you want, but I do find that it's kind of nice to lay it all out flat and then fold it in half and seam up from the bottom side, seaming all these edges together in like a zigzag way, and then also come in from the arms, seaming underneath the arms in a zigzag way. So you're just folding all this in half, and we're just seaming all these things. And when you get to this point, it will leave a triangle, and that's where we want to insert our triangle. And I find it easiest, instead of seaming this onto here and trying to figure out where it goes, I find it easiest to do all this seaming and then just simply go in and seam that triangle into place. And that's how we're going to seam the body of our cardigan together. Now, once we have that, we will be ready to work on the ribbing, because this whole thing, you can put it on, you can try it on. Once you've done this seaming, it will be a cardigan, and we're going to work on those details. Now, when we are working in this triangle piece under the arms, we have one edge that is a raw edge, and we don't have slip stitches to necessarily guide us there, or any edge stitches. So what you'll simply do is just keep it going flat, looping in and out. This is under the arm, so it's really not even going to be noticeable, but I'm just working along one edge and then just picking up some of this edge about the same distance apart. And it will look nice and tidy once we get all the way across here and weave in our ends. And this, where this is hidden, don't stress about it too much. You're just going to be picking up stitches from that raw edge and grabbing your stitches from the other edge, and it hides it quite nicely. Now, once you have your cardigan completely seamed, I want to start by doing the ribbing along the bottom. If you want to jump to the cuffs, you can. Really, whatever order you want to do these in is fine. But I do find if I do the bottom first, then when I'm working up the center, it looks quite nice. It kind of comes out from the bottom, so the center one comes all the way to the bottom. So this edge definitely needs to be cleaned up a bit. So we're going to work on creating ribbing on the bottom of the cardigan here. And then after that, I'm going to come in and we're going to seam up and around the neckline and back down. And we're going to create buttonholes if you want. You do not have to do buttons with this, but I want to show that as an option, as well as then we'll come back and we'll be working this cuff. Now, I also want to note for this that if you did not want to make a cardigan, you do not have to. You can make a sweater. So if you notice in the center here, these half triangles, they match up on here. So what you could do is you could, instead of doing these half squares, so these triangles, you could just do whole squares, and then it's a V-neck sweater. So it's just like doing the back piece again. There's just no need to do all these triangles here, and you can just do whole squares, and then it can be a sweater, and the only thing you need to do is work the ribbing around that neckline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bottom of my cardigan, I'm going to start with the right side facing and attach to the right side over here. And grab my yarn. Now I'm going to use this parchment again, but if you would like to do one of the contrasting colors for the ribbing, that's totally fine too. I think that would look amazing. I'm going to be a bit boring and stick with the parchment. It just is what I have the most of. I'm not sure if I have enough of the other colors to do a different color of ribbing. So I'm simply going to attach to this right side, to the very corner of this right side with the slip stitch, and then I'm going to zoom in here. Now, we could work across this bottom, but it is quite uneven. I find for a lot of ribbing, especially when you're working on an uneven edge, it's a really good idea to simply go ahead and slip stitch across this entire line, and that way you can make sure you try to get your slip stitches really even. And when you're working your ribbing, because ribbing can naturally have some flexibility or pull to it, you won't have to worry about your ribbing messing up the bottom of your cardigan, pulling it in or being too loose, because you will already have set the amount of stitches you want in slip stitching so that it's nice and even. You'll know right where you want to insert your hook when it comes time to do the ribbing where we're going to be working in single crochet rows. So I'm going to go ahead without causing any puckering or anything that's too loose. I'm simply going to slip stitch across the entire bottom edge of the cardigan. Now, after slip stitching across the bottom part of this cardigan, it's already started to even out quite a bit. It's looking a lot more smooth, and now we're time to make it look even better. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my work here, and we are going to be working into those slip stitches. So those slip stitches are going to be our guide for our ribbing. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start and I'm going to chain 8. Now, the amount of stitches that you chain will determine how thick your ribbing is on the bottom. I've done a turning chain, so I'm going to be working this in 7 stitches per row. But if you want to make this thinner or thicker, all you need to do is decrease or increase the amount of chains you want at the beginning of each row. Now, starting in the second chain from the hook, I'm going to single crochet, and then I'm going to single crochet into the remaining chains as well. And now that I have worked down all 7 stitches, what we're going to do is we're going to look at these slip stitches along this edge here. And you can either work through both loops of the slip stitches or simply the front loop only, leaving the back loop to create a line across the bottom of this. But I'm going to be working through the entire slip stitch for this cardigan. That changes with my mood, depends on what I want to do. But I'm going to slip stitch 2 stitches along the bottom of the edge using those slip stitches that we did across, and then I'm going to turn my work. And now we're going to skip the 2 slip stitches we just did that we did from the body of this cardigan, and starting in the back loop only, we're going to work the last 7 stitches of this row. Now, another tip I want to do, so this will be single crochet in the back loop only, but another tip I want to mention is when you get to the very edge, so I'm working all these single crochet stitches in the back loop only, but this very last stitch, the 7th stitch in the row, if you work through both of the loops, it makes a little bit of a straighter edge just along this edge. So I've done my last single crochet, and now I'm going to once again turn my work. You can chain 1. And now the very first stitch of this next row, because I do want to make it a nice straight edge, I'm going to work through both loops. And in the remaining stitches of this row, I'm going to work single crochets into that back loop only. All right, so now that I've worked those 7 stitches, I'm going to look at my slip stitches here, and I'm going to slip stitch into the next 2 from the bottom of that body, and then turn my work, skip the 2 stitches that we just slip stitched, and working in the back loop only, single crochet into each stitch across, and if you want a really straight edge in the very last stitch, single crochet through both loops. And now we'll go ahead and turn our work, chain 1, Work through both loops for your very first stitch in this row, and then single crochet in the back loop only for the remaining loops on this row. And now once we have 7 stitches, we are going to slip stitch into the next 2 from the body. I think you see this 2-row repeat happening now. Turn our work, skip the 2 slip stitches, and in the back loop only, single crochet the remaining on the row, but of course working the very last stitch through both loops if you want. So we're just going to keep repeating those 2 rows all the way across the bottom of this body until we have worked the entire row across. So we're working in rows for our ribbing. You can see where this has started, and we'll keep working this all the way across the very bottom of the cardigan, stopping at the opposite corner where we started our slip stitches, and then we'll come on back. So now that we have this bottom ribbing done, I've gone ahead and fastened off my end. You could weave it in because we actually need to come back to this side over here and do the same thing we did along the bottom, but we're going to be doing that around the opening. So I'm going to start by turning here, attaching my yarn to this corner, and then we're going to work the same style of ribbing all the way around. But first, before we do that, just like we did on the bottom here, we are going to want to slip stitch along this entire edge, and that way it will even it out, and when we're working our ribbing, we know that there won't be any puckering or pulling because we will already have evened this out, and we'll know right where to put our slip stitches when we're doing the ribbing in rows, because we'll be putting them into these slip stitches. So I'm simply going to be working up this side without causing any puckering all the way across. So I'm going to go all the way up around this neckline, back down the neckline, and back down to the other side. And once I've slip stitched that, then we can go ahead and start our ribbing. So I have slip stitched all the way around this opening, and I'm back down here to this bottom side, and now you see some stitch markers in here, and I want to talk about why. So I am going to be working the ribbing back up this way, the same exact ribbing and stitch count that I did on this side, where I'm doing 7 total stitches. At this edge, once I got to slip stitching to this edge, I simply chained 8 out this way, and now I'm working along the rows and slip stitching 2 from the edges, just as we did down here. So the same instructions, but we'll be working this ribbing all the way up and around. Now, when you get to these corners, you want to make sure that it's not pulling the fabric in so that then the corner sticks out. If you need to, you can always slip stitch, do more slip stitches along these edges as you work around them. And then as you get to these areas of the neck, if we don't want to have too much fabric in here, because then this will make it pucker if we have too few, this will make it flare if we have too many. So if you get to this edge and you feel like, oh, I feel like when I'm slip stitching along these edges, I'm getting too much ribbing out here, you could go ahead and skip some of those slip stitches and continue on with your ribbing. So instead of slip stitching 2 from the edge right together, you could slip stitch 1, skip 1, and slip stitch 1, and it will look great. And then it won't have any issues with the ribbing laying nice and flat. So I just want you to be conscious when you're working around. The only difference from the bottom is those areas, just to make sure that they remain nice and flat. So now these stitch markers that I have placed in here are for buttons. I want to put buttons on mine, but you absolutely do not have to. This is a personal choice if you want to do it or not. It's no right or wrong way. It's a design aspect. And I have 4 buttons. All I had was 4, so that's how many I'm doing. And on this side, when I'm working this ribbing all the way up, it's not going to matter because my buttons will be sewn on later. I don't need to worry about changing anything as I work up this side and then I work around. But once I get to this side, I'll need to make holes in my ribbing for my buttons to fit through. Now, whichever side you place your buttons and you place your holes, it's correct. I know a long time ago we used to say, oh, buttons have to be on a certain side for women and a certain side for men, but that is completely whatever. You can do it however you want to do it. It does not matter. We don't need to focus on which side buttons are on. Just think about which side is comfortable for you and what you prefer. But when we are making the holes, we want to make sure that we do so, because otherwise our button will have nothing to fit through. So I've gone ahead and placed markers at the points that I know when I'm working this ribbing, I will want to make a buttonhole. And that's what you'll want to do too, is like if you have 5 buttons, place markers, as evenly as you can across the front of this cardigan. If you have 3 buttons, that's fine. You do however many buttons you want, but just be sure to place markers, and then I will show you how to make that buttonhole when you get to that point. So I'm going to keep working the ribbing along this edge the same way that we did the ribbing down here until I get all the way around to the buttonhole point, and then I'm going to show you how to make buttonholes. Now I'm almost back down to this marker where we're going to talk about buttonholes, but before we do, I want to once again talk about how I shaped this right here, this V that comes up, as well as around this neckline. So here, when I did the slip stitching along the edges, for a section, instead of slip stitching 2 stitches along the edge, I slipped 1. And then I turned and repeated the work. And what that does is it added more rows with a smaller space here and made it flare out this way, wider here than here. And that allows that curve to happen. And then when we're talking up here, we had a curve that was tight here. So I actually skipped stitches along the edge. I would skip a stitch and slip stitch, and then skip a stitch and slip stitch, and then turn. I did that a couple times. And what that does is I'm working along a wider edge here, which makes it a more narrow outcome over here. And that's how I work these rows so that they sit quite nicely in those areas, and it has a really nice curve to it without having extra fabric that doesn't lay quite right. So that's what I will be doing right here along this edge till I get to the buttonhole, is when I work towards that edge, and I just want to show you one time what I will do. So I'm going to work my single crochets in the back loop only until I get to the front body edge. Now, once I get to the edge, normally we would be slip stitching 2, but I'm only going to slip stitch 1 and then turn my work, skip that 1 slip stitch, and single crochet in the back loop only across. And what that does is it works along a shorter edge here to allow more fabric to be out on the other side of it, which is what we want. It just creates a nice little fan there so that it doesn't pucker around a corner. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about these buttonholes. Now, in no way do you need to do buttonholes for this. You can leave it as just an open front with ribbing and it looks great. But if you did want the option to have buttons to close this on the front or just for extra details, we will want to create buttonholes because we will be placing our buttons by stitching them on one side, and we'll need holes for the other side. Now, whatever size button you want to use is fine. It all comes down to how much we chain, and you'll want to chain smaller, quite a bit smaller than your buttonhole, because we have so much space around these stitches even when we make chains that we want to make sure our button doesn't slip out of that hole really easily. So once you determine the placements of where you're going to be doing buttonhole rows based on where your stitch markers are, we're going to go ahead and create a space on that row. So for this size of button, I find chaining 2 is best. I could chain 3, but I feel like it might be a little bit loose. And if it is, this might pop open if I gain a few pounds. So I'm going to start by single crocheting into the first 3 stitches. But if you need a bigger buttonhole, only single crochet into the first 2 and work those in the back loop only. And now I'm going to chain 2, skip the next 2 stitches, and work the last 2 stitches in the back loop only. And now before I check my buttonhole with my button fitting into it, I want to go ahead and work the very next row. The reason why is because we want to make sure once we do another row above these chains, it's going to work. So around this edge a little bit, I'm still just going to slip stitch 1 till I feel like I've really gotten this curve done nicely. And then I'm going to turn my work, skipping 1 and single crochet in the back loop only. And even those chain stitches, they have a back loop. You only want to work the back loop of those chain stitches. That way, if it's not buttoned, that hole is not very noticeable. And it looks great open as well. See, so now we can barely tell that there is a buttonhole there, which is totally fine. And now we're going to go ahead and take our button, pretend like it was attached to one side, and see how it feels when you slide it through that hole. And I like that. That's great for me. It has some resistance, which is great, but I don't have to push too hard, but my button's not going to slip out on its own. So you'll just want to test that to make sure that it works, and then continue to work buttonholes or with however many buttons you want down the front of this cardigan. Now that I've got the front ribbing done and I've got my buttonholes here, it's time to attach the buttons, and we can do that by lining them up. You can even place one over the other, and we're going to line up and stitch our buttonholes in place or sew them in place. I have a smaller needle that will go through the actual holes of this button, and I'm just going to use the yarn to stitch these into place where they need to be to line up with the buttonholes. For the sleeves, I would like to leave them wide, but obviously this edging is not very pretty, so we'll need to make that a little bit prettier. So I'm going to go underneath the arm, because whenever we start a join, it's best to do it underneath the arm. That way it's just not noticeable. And I'm going to go ahead and join my main color of yarn, chain one, and then I'm going to do what we did along the front edge. I'm going to slip stitch evenly all the way around the bottom of this sleeve. So we're just going to slip stitch around. This is already starting to look better, but we're going to come back and do another round after slip stitching around. So now, after working a round of slip stitches, we don't necessarily need to join and chain one. We can work continuously here. And I'm going to go right into my very first slip stitch and start with a single crochet. And it's not a bad idea to go ahead and mark that very first stitch of the round so that we know where we are when we come back. We know where we're going to start our second round if we want to do a second round. So I'm going to single crochet into each stitch around. Now, after doing a round of single crochet, this is looking great, and you can stop here if you want, but I really want this edge to pop really nice and clean. I'm not making a thick edge. We don't have to unless you want to add length. You could always add ribbing, or you can do more rounds of single crochet, but I'm simply going to be finishing this off with one more round of slip stitches. And the reason why is because the slip stitches really pull to the front of the work, and that way we can really see a clean edge of V's running across there. So I'm going to do one more round, and I'm going to slip stitch all the way around. After working all the way around in slip stitches, I'm ready to go ahead and fasten off my yarn. And I want to do what's called an invisible join here so that we don't see where we started doing this edging. And what I do to do that is, this is my first stitch in the round. I'm actually going to insert my needle into the second stitch as if I were to be crocheting it. So I'm going through both loops, and then I'm going to move my stitch marker, and we're almost creating a faux stitch. So I'm going to pull this down, and now I'm going to go back down through my very last stitch that I worked. And that just kind of creates a faux stitch on top and really evens it out. And now I can go ahead and weave in all my ends. And I saved a few ends for last, so I have a few to weave in. We will want to go ahead and repeat all of these steps on the other sleeve as well. And now we have a really cute granny square cardigan. You can go ahead and block this again. I'm going to be blocking mine again. The reason why is, once we add all that ribbing and we did all the stitching of the granny squares together, it really could benefit from doing a blocking to keep everything really into place, even out the bottoms of those sleeves. So blocking again will make a difference. I really, really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. This has been work of labor, but a really, really fun granny square cardigan to create. So I hope you had fun. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back for more fun projects soon.